Really interesting fight coming up this weekend at middleweight. We have Greece's the Spartan. Listen, one of two Spartans on this card. Andreas Michailidis taking on the Bengal, KB Bhullar. And Matt, if Canadians were looking for a hopeful at middleweight to go up there to do what George St. Pierre was able to do to beat Michael Bisping, KB Bhullar was that next hopeful.
GSP?
And in his last fight, he came in on short notice. And it should be said, for both of these guys, they were able to forego their bookings on Dana White's Contender Series to come into the UFC on short notice. For KB Bhullar, he drew Tom Breeze. For Andreas Michailidis, he drew Modestas Bukauskas, and he had to pop up a weight class to take the fight. He did have a little bit of success in that fight. He was able to strike a little bit. The kicks were interesting. And then right at the end, in the last 7 or 8 seconds, he goes for a double leg takedown. He commits to it a la, I don't know, Ryan Spann. Every time he goes for a double leg, got elbowed. Didn't really have a great conversation with Dan Movaheady. Fell outside of the cage. Fight's over due to TKO. But for Andreas Michailidis, if you look at it in the overall body of work, he's a European BJJ champion. He's a 3-time kickboxing champion as well. Very well-rounded pedigree. Are his takedowns all the best, notwithstanding that last fight? They're all right, but he can grind, he can strike, he can really do it all. And if you want a great fight for Andreas Michailidis, if you want to go back and see one that's a lot of fun, the Marcel Fortuna fight that he was able to win with Titan FC back in 2019, really impressive one, great finish. And again, you talk about the kicks, one of his strong suits. For KB Bhullar, he's a guy coming out of Shea Bears MMA, Hayabusa Training Center up in Alberta. He's a main training partner and just overall pal of one Tanner Boser. And from KB Bhullar, we went back, and this is one of those things that kind of bugged me, because on the broadcast for Bhullar Breeze, they kind of did the old, there's not a lot of fight tape out there. Well, we spent the $5.99s and the $6.99s to watch KB Bhullar's fights with Unified, and there you would have seen him fight Matt Dwyer, UFC vet, had a few fights, ended up winning one in the UFC, and you go back and watch it, kind of sloppy. I mean, the guy has a Taekwondo base, and his striking is fairly crisp. His takedown defense is incredibly porous, and once he gets on the back, not that great. And when he fought Matt Dwyer, it was more a question of, okay, well, how good's Matt Dwyer's conditioning? Because he looked tired. And really, by the end of it, so did Bhullar. It was a hard-fought fight. It was a good one. And the other thing about KB Bhullar is if you look at his overall body of work, it's the big layoff at one point. I mean, he started fighting in 2012. He took a fight in 2013, and then he didn't fight again until 2018. And while he was active and he was picking out first-round finishes, 4-8 the opponent, 13-12, 16-13, and then Matt Dwyer 11-5. That was a decision win back in 2019. It was a 5-round main event. Then he had fights booked against Jordan Williams, who's in the UFC now, Bruno Oliveira on Contender Series, Tom Breeze, and then Tom Breeze again. They moved it around, and he had that long time off, and he got beat by one of Matt's most unfavored shots, and it's one that I pick on all the time. It's the Trevin Giles special. It was the power jab. And then he just kind of fell down, and Breeze capitalized, and that was it.
Now, there's just so much to talk about in this fight, but there's so little to talk about, really. Because for KB Bhullar, he's like if Zabit fought at 145, and I don't mean like, hey, if Zabit weighed 185 pounds. Like, if 145 pounds Zabit fought at 185, stylistically, they would be similar. KB Bhullar, he throws a lot of those showy kicks, but my issue is he doesn't land a lot of them. And that really is my problem with KB Bhullar. He's one of those fighters, and I don't really know what category to loop him into, because when I think about spinning shit fighters, to quote Nick Diaz, I think of like Edson Barbosa. But I think about fighters that actually land those techniques. When you watch Bhullar, he does have some of that showiness to his striking, but he really lands those strikes with a lot of authority. It's one of those like, wow, he just missed a spinning back kick. It was cool, but did it land and do any damage? No. It just made him more tired as a result. And for Michailidis, I just think he's the more well-rounded mixed martial artist at the end of the day. Does he have the wrestling? It's not great, but he can use that, and he does actively use that in MMA, which is one thing that Bhullar's going to really struggle with. I thought in the Bhullar-Breeze fight, Breeze's best path to victory would be take down KB Bhullar, use that jiu-jitsu, use your ground and pound. I'm sure he could have done that if the fight did go past 2 minutes in the first round, but Breeze really did just land one jab. Bhullar was off balance, because that's the one thing about Bhullar's striking too. He does have that kind of weird shift to his hips, almost like Thiago Santos, and he keeps his hands very low as a result. And since his hands are low, he is able to get hit by big shots. And not that Tom Breeze is the biggest striker in the world, but if Tom Breeze is able to put you down on the feet, then I worry about what a guy like Michailidis is going to be able to do. Because you talk about his kicks, just overall his combinations and his punches as well, I just think are a lot more damaging than any technique KB Bhullar has. So a lot of this breakdown just comes down to me asking myself, what does KB Bhullar do better than Andreas Michailidis? not really much at the end of the day, so it's really hard to side with Bhullar in this fight.
I mean, he switches stances.
He does.
I don't know. I have a look at this too, and for Michailidis, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, he's supposed to take on Antonio Arroyo at the end of last year, back in November. Ended up, he had to withdraw. And again, for KB Bhullar, this is his first booking since the Tom Breeze fight. He's booked a couple of different times with Bruno Oliveira on Contender Series, and he got the short notice call up to go to the big show. So it is tricky. Again, who has the better wrestling? I don't know. Neither guy, really. And the one thing that I don't really love about Michailidis, if I'm going to nitpick, he holds his hands really high, but he can get backed up. And if you read Sean Bitter's preview over on Cage Side Press to welcome in Andreas Michailidis, he's a 7.5-minute fighter. And if you fight into the second half of a fight, he can kind of tail off a little bit. So both of these guys are fairly quick workers. Again, for Bhullar, the 5-round fight against Matt Dwyer, it goes to decision. But if you go back and watch it, after like the second round, into the second round, it gets pretty sloppy as well.
You know, there's sometimes fights where we say, hey, both guys' stocks kind of rose after that. Honestly, the Dwyer fight for KB Bhullar is one of those fights where you look at it at the end and it's like, he won, but then you just kind of look at everything. Okay, so he beat Matt Dwyer, who's not in his prime. It's not really UFC Matt Dwyer. Was he able to finish him? Well, no, he went 5 rounds. Did he look good? He looked good for about 2.5 of them, and then it did taper off. It just, there's not a lot of positives, really, when I try to look long-term for KB Bhullar.
Well, we'll have to see what happens, but if you look at the odds, KB Bhullar went from a plus 155 to a plus 199 over on Best Fight Odds. If you look at it for Andreas Michailidis, he went from a minus 180 to a minus 248. I'm at the part that the fans love the most. We're going to look at the Tapology votes. Out of 901 total predictions, 75% with Michailidis, 79% have him to win by knockout. For the 25% that have Bhullar, 48% by decision, 31% by knockout. Is there a path to victory there? Sure. I mean, if KB Bhullar goes out there and really starts to attack with his own kicks, if he's able to move quite well, because he does. He might not have the best output, but he does switch his stances quite well, and you talked about it. Fairly happy hips, so maybe out of that, he's going to be able to defend some of the takedowns. I just don't see it here. Andreas Michailidis is one of those guys that, even though he lost to Bukauskas up a weight class, and even though he's into his 30s, I like him for the parts and parcels of his game, so I am going to go with Greece's Andreas Michailidis in this fight.
I don't know if it gave it away, just kind of the whole breakdown up until him now, but no, I do agree. I like Michailidis. Just at the end of the day, he just does everything a little bit better. And even when you look at KB Bhullar's strengths, I still think Michailidis outshines him in those areas. So at the end of the day, I've got to go with Michailidis.
Maybe the Bengal can outstrike the Spartan, but for both of us, we've got Andreas Michailidis to get the win. Really looking forward to our main event, Matt. We have Yuri Prochazka, the former Ryzen light heavyweight champ, taking on the uncrowned champ at one point, Dominic Reyes. Really looking forward to that fight. Make sure you keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.